Hi students, welcome back for week 4 of our modern dance choreographer deep dive. Today we are talking about Merce Cunningham, and you have heard me talk about Merce before. We've done exercises of Merce's before. So last week you talked about Martha Graham, the Picasso of dance, who flipped everything for modern dance that we had up to that point on its head. And Merce is going to do the same. He's going to flip it again. He was a student of Martha Graham, so everybody's connected. It's great, isn't it? So Merce started dancing at the age of 12, and his teacher saw such promise in him that she took him on tour with the teacher's daughter. Now, there's not a lot of detail about what kind of dance they were doing or where they were touring or anything like that, but we do know that they were dancing on tour. So whether it was the vaudeville scene, modern dance scene, we're not exactly sure. In 1937, he started dancing and studying with Bonnie Bird. Bonnie Bird at the time was a Martha Graham dancer, so he was already learning Martha Graham technique before he even met Martha, knew Martha. And he also at that time met John Cage. And John Cage is a very, very important person in Merce's life. He played the piano for the classes that he was taking. And he also became his composer and his life partner. So John was extremely important to Merce in all facets of his life. So by 1940, he was a soloist with the Martha Graham Company. And if you feel like I'm glazing over his past, I am, because we don't know a lot about Merce's past. We know he started at 12. We know he went on tour with his teacher's daughter, and we know that he worked with Bonnie Bird. That's about all we know until he gets to Martha Graham's studio. So by 1940, he's a soloist with Martha Graham, and that's when we really start paying attention to him. He was a different kind of modern dancer at this time. Most modern dancers had come to terms with the idea of, we're only doing modern. Ballet is not for us. It's not important. It's not the way of the future. And Merce didn't feel that way. Merce took ballet. He studied ballet intensively, actually. He wanted to make sure he had the dexterity and the speed that dance required, and he felt he got that from ballet. He thought it was important to understand and be able to do ballet and do it well and do it correctly. He eventually broke with the Martha Graham Studio Company in 1945 because he felt it was, quote, nonsense, that each specific movement had a specific meaning or a specific reason for it happening. He didn't understand whatever happened to movement just being movement for movement's sake. He didn't understand why every single arm movement and every single gesture had to mean something. So he decided to go off on his own, and John Cage went with him. And in 1949, Merce formed his own company, the Merce Cunningham Dance Company. And his work was not very well received at the beginning. The world of dance and the world of art, as I've talked before, go back and forth. They're hand in hand. So if you look at art history, the same thing is happening pretty closely in dance history. So as we're seeing this transition out of ballet into modern, we're also seeing that transition from our more classical type artists into more of an abstract art or a modern art, which is why it's modern art and modern dance. So we're seeing the same shifts happening. They're parallel. They might be a couple of years apart, but they are parallel for the most part. So when we see Merce emerge as his own choreographer, his own company, we see a lot of painters and a lot of sculptors and a lot of musicians really like what Merce is doing because it parallels to what they're doing. Dancers, on the other hand, weren't receiving his work very well. It was very different. It did not tell a story. It was hard to follow, and the music was just awful. Sorry, it's a little windy. My camera's going all over the place. But the music was not well received. So when we look at the music that John Cage was composing, it was loud, It was unintelligible. And he didn't work in just one medium. So he was a pianist, but he also worked with different instruments, and he also worked with singers as well. So a lot of times he would have people shrieking in a concert as music, and it was almost for some people painful to sit through. So the artists, painters, sculptors, musicians really thought this was groundbreaking, and it might not be comfortable, or you might not be able to understand it, but it was new, it was different. Dancers did not, it took them a while to warm up to Merce and to John and what they were doing. So soon after he opened his own company in 1949, Merce started playing with the idea of chance. And this is where little light bulbs should be turning on in your brains, because we have done the work of chance. So when we were in the studio and we got out those dice that we have at the studio, and we would write on the mirror, number 1, give me a movement for number 1, give me a movement for number 2, what's number 3, 4, 5, 6, and then we'd roll the dice, and then that would be our movement sequence. That is what Merce Cunningham is known for. He is known for his work with chance. So what he would do is he would create a walking pattern, a movement pattern, some kind of movement that he knew he wanted to have exist on the stage. And then he would take it and he would create cards. So he would have decks. So he would have a deck of cards for arm movements, a deck of cards for body directions, a deck of cards for levels and speeds, anything you could think about. And he would shuffle the decks, and then he would pick cards out of each deck so that he knew with this particular movement pattern, these are going to be your arms. And he would do it for the group, and then he would also do it for each individual dancer. So Kiri, you would have a different set from Alicia, from a different set from Kayla, and anyone else who was in our class. Everybody would have something different. And it would change every single time you would do it, or whenever he decided he wanted to change things up. So he would do this for each dancer, and sometimes it would be for every single performance. So his dancers really had to know how to think on their toes and to be able to retain this information. I'm going to read a quote about this when he was interviewed about why go through all of this rigmarole, why go through all of this, game of chance. Wouldn't it be easier to just choreograph something and then you could basically forget it once your dancers were taught and they knew it? And he said, the feeling I have when I compose, he called it composing, when I compose in this way, is that I am in touch with a natural resource far greater than my own personal inventiveness could ever be. It is a mode of freeing my imagination from its own cliches. So he really felt like, in a way, almost to not get stuck with choreographer block. So many writers have writer's block, and I will admit, as a dance teacher, I get choreography block a lot. But in a way to get out of that, let chance decide it, and let's see what happens with it. And then there was also talk about, well, what if you don't like what chance gives you? What if it doesn't work? And he did say, I'm not saying that I won't change it. I'm not saying that I won't manipulate what chance has given me, but it's a jumping off point to start seeing what works and what doesn't. So yeah, if the dancer's on the floor and the next thing that they're supposed to do, given by chance, is to be up in the air, I have to either put something in between the two, or I have to change that. And then, it grew from there. So that's really what Merce is known for. Slightly switching gears over to John Cage, he was similar with his ideas in music. He was groundbreaking about trying different sounds and different instruments together that had never been used before. Again, up until this point, a lot of modern was done by storytelling and with the traditional ideas of Western music. So a piano or wind instruments, brass instruments, things like that. He was into drums and, like I said, vocalists, I don't know if you can call them singers. I know I did a little bit ago, but maybe vocalists is a better word. But both John and Merce felt like dance and music shouldn't coordinate or support one another intentionally. If they ended up doing that, fine, but we shouldn't set out on the path to support one another. Each is independent and each does its own thing. And if they end up working well together, great. They also felt that feeling needed to be removed from art in general. That by having a feeling or an idea of what art or dance or music should or shouldn't be, you were closing off the possibility of what these could become. So if you could remove your expectations, if you could remove your feelings about these things and just in a way accept it is what it is, that maybe you would become more invested into it at some point and you would grow to find it interesting and learn that not everything has to tell a story that you're familiar with or that makes sense, and that maybe it could tell your own story and that the person sitting next to you would have a different story and the person in front of you's story would be different, and that there doesn't need to be a story. It can be movement for the sake of movement. There can be sound for the sake of sound. And that was really new, especially as we're getting into the 1950s, the 1960s, where we do have this idea of breaking boundaries. I mean, if you do anything and research the 1960s, I would start in the 1950s and transition through 1960s and see how vastly different the two decades are in cultural norms and societal norms. It's significant, and the same thing was happening in dance. Another thing that Merce did was, for some of his pieces, he didn't use frontally oriented stage space. So when we think about, how we were learning our recital dance, we were facing the wall so that we would get used to not dancing with the mirror and we would get used to having that same front be our front. He didn't do that all the time. Sometimes he used a traditional stage. A lot of times he liked to use a black box theater where the floor, the walls, the ceiling, everything is black, hence black box theater, where the audience could sit anywhere. Anywhere was considered front. And a lot of times he liked an L shape. So he would have people sitting in the front and he would have people sitting on the side so that you could see the movement from different angles. His movement was never designed to be seen just from one angle. It was meant to be seen from 360. He also never picked a central or a soloist. He never picked a central dancer. Everything was random. No dancer in his mind held more value or importance over another. Everything in his mind was on the same equal playing field. And up until that point, we had Ruth St. Denis dancing in her own pieces, Ted Shawn dancing in his own pieces. Isadora Duncan was the center point of all of her pieces. Same with Martha Graham. Martha Graham wouldn't even go to her own, company rehearsals after she couldn't dance anymore. I mean, this was a different way of thinking of, it's not about you, it's about each and every dancer. So he really took the idea of modern telling a story in kind of an abstract way to modern not needing a story and not needing a purpose. And music, John Cage took it the same way, as music doesn't need a purpose. Music can stand alone on itself. They worked together and were together until Merce died in 2009. And Merce is known for the beginning of what they call avant-garde modern. So this, like I said, this idea, kind of more of what we do in class, where we move in a way that is complementary to our bodies and the way that we like to move. And it's not a rigid, very specific, you must be in a first position, you must execute a plie this specific way. It is more about moving for the sake of movement. And not that the other styles of modern aren't important. And I hope that we get together again soon and that we can play with that idea of trying some more strict techniques like Martha Graham, like Jose Limon, like Lester Horton. So many modern dancers have a very specific style that I'd love to be able to teach you. But a lot of times when we first start with our modern classes, it's good to kind of take dance and throw it on the opposite end and show how different it can be from ballet and tap and jazz, and not murky the water with, well, it's kind of another lyrical, it's kind of another contemporary. No, it's something completely different. It can be like those, but it is also completely different. So that was our deep dive into Merce. I hope you've enjoyed this 4-part series into our modern choreographers. If you would like to learn more about choreographers, leave a comment or hit the like button or tell Carrie, and we can definitely do more of these. I think it's always it's a part of dance that I've always loved, is the history, and we never get to talk about it in class. So I love this deep dive and being able to actually take time out and learn about why we're doing what we're doing. So hope you're all doing really well. I hope you're not all bored to tears. One thing that I would suggest, if you are interested, just like the Martha Graham video that we did last week, if you are interested, Merce Cunningham also has great social media platform presence. And go on, search him. There's a website, they have social media. Go see if there's any classes that you can take, or at least experience, so that you can see how his company does it. It's quite something. So hope you're all doing well. I will see you soon.